This is episode 21 of Learn Lightroom 5, and in this episode we're going to make a photorealistic HDR image. Now you remember in episode 20 we did an HDR image and we went over into Photoshop and made a 16-bit image, and we did that weird tone mapping where we made this really bizarre image. When you do a 32-bit image in Photoshop, it's very photorealistic. So if done correctly, people won't even know that it was an HDR image. And this comes in particularly handy when you have an image like this one here with this very, very bright area in a relatively dark area. So you want to make sure you capture all the tones and all the shades of gray. You want them in the image. So what we're going to do in this one, we're going to do some light developing in Lightroom. Then we're going to take it over into Photoshop, create that 32-bit image, and bring it back in Lightroom to finish our developing. And you'll see how powerful it is, really. Before we do that, though, if you guys could subscribe to my YouTube channel, I'd really appreciate it. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go to the first image in the stack here. I made a 7-image HDR, and each one is one step apart, with this one being what my camera considered to be the correct exposure for this scene. Then I did one step more exposed, going, that's these thumbnails going to the left, and one step less exposed going to the right. Now I confused someone when I was saying that last time when I said one stop this, one stop that, 3 stops. I don't mean f-stops. I think I shot on f11. Yes, I usually do shoot on the f11 on shots like this. I left f11 alone on every shot, but as you could see, my shutter speed changed. So it's, if you reduce your shutter speed one stop, it's you know, the way you say it. So I don't mean f-stops. I mean I left my shutter or my aperture at f11. My f-stop was f11 all the way through. I just adjusted my shutter speed for each shot. So I was exactly one stop less a light or more a light. Okay? Alright, let's go to this first image, and we're going to do the just some very simple processing in Lightroom before we send it over into Photoshop. And what I did is, in the previous episode, is I turned clarity up a little bit, usually in the 30s somewhere. And then I go down to lens corrections and I enable profile corrections, and that's all I do. Now I want to do that to all of these, so I'm going to hold the shift key down and click on the last image in this stack, and then I'm going to click sync. Now it comes up with this dialog box. I already have it checked in the right areas from the last time we did this. I'm going to sync clarity and lens profile corrections across all those images. Okay, now it's done already. Now it still should be selected. If it isn't, do the same thing by clicking on the first one, hold the shift key down, click on the last one to select them all. Now right click on any of them, and we're going to go into Edit in Merge to HDR Pro in Photoshop. Now what it will do is it'll take these 7 images and open them all up in Photoshop. Then it's going to open a HDR preview window. And as I mentioned in the last episode, for some reason my Photoshop CC, that preview window is disjointed. It like separates the image with this white band going down the middle. And I don't know why it does that. I've searched the Adobe forums and no one's ever had that problem. So I mentioned before, if anyone knows of what's wrong, and could email me at tony@anthonymorganti.com or tell me on Twitter at Anthony Morganti. I'd appreciate it, because it's kind of annoying. It doesn't affect the final image. It only the preview is only distorted. And curiously, I still have Photoshop CS6 on this machine, and in that it works fine. So I'm not really sure why in CC it does this, but it's makes it inconvenient when I'm trying to show you guys how it works. Okay, this is it here. This is what I'm talking about. This band here, it's not supposed to be there, and I really don't know what's going on. Okay, last time now, we did a 16-bit image, and we did all this tone mapping down here to make this really bizarre image. And I actually used a custom or a preset. I used Scott 5 to make the image. As you can see, if disregarding this white bar here, that kind of makes it really bizarre. We don't want to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to do a 32-bit image. And as you could see, in a 32-bit image, there's almost nothing to choose from here. Okay, just make sure that you have remove ghost checked. Okay, because this is an outdoor scene and it was windy, and so the trees were moving. So I'm going to check remove ghost. If you have a still life that you photograph, don't worry about that. It goes a little faster if you don't have that checked. So I'm going to make sure that's checked. Make sure complete toning in Adobe Camera Raw is not checked, because we're going to do our toning in Lightroom. So if you check this, what happens is when you're done here, it'll open up Adobe Camera Raw for you to do your tone mapping. Now this bar here is just kind of where you're going to be picking your white point, and it's you don't want it way over here. Typically, I just move it all the way to the right, so every pixel's involved. All right, you could, if you could move it, wherever you think you want it. I'm just moving it all to the right, so I get every dark pixel there is in the shot. And then you click OK. Now what it will do, it's going to create the HDR image, and then it's going to open it up into Photoshop, and it's going to look like crap. But don't worry about it, all right? It's going to be a humongous file. And I'm talking, if you're, I think my typical TIFF files are, when I create them with Photoshop, are maybe around 50 to 100 meg. This image is going to be 250 to 300 meg in size, so it's huge. So okay, this is our crappy looking image that I mentioned. We're not going to do anything in Photoshop. Part of the reason why it doesn't look good is Photoshop really can't read 32-bit TIFF files. So it's kind of down converting it into 16-bit to display here. But luckily and happily, Lightroom does read 32-bit TIFF files. And so does Adobe Camera Raw. That's why it asked you if you wanted to complete the toning in Adobe Camera Raw. We're not. We're going to do it, as I mentioned, in Photoshop. So what we're going to do is we're going to close Photoshop down. It's going to ask me if I want to save this. Yes, make sure you save it. And it will save this image and then open it up in Lightroom. Now, remember I mentioned this is a huge image. And to prove that, if you look at exposure slider here, we have 20 stops of exposure. Look at it, goes to +10 and -10. Now, open up a normal RAW file, and you'll see it goes from +5 to -5. You see all the way open, all the way overexposed. I get that. Whereas this image, when I go all the way overexposed, I get white. So there's a lot more data in this file. So that's why I like doing 32-bit HDRs, particularly when I have images like this. So what we're going to do now, we're going to process this normally as we would any other file in Lightroom. So because there's so much more data there, we have a lot more, you'll see the results become a lot more satisfying, I guess, for lack of a better term. So in this image, it's still a little bright, so I'm going to pull highlights all the way down. I'm going to pull shadows up. Now I'm not going to bring them all the way up like I typically do, because that's a little too bright, but I'm going to bring them up a little bit. I might readjust those later. We'll see. The next thing I'm do, before I do whites and blacks, I'm going to put a graduated filter in here. So I'm going to open up the graduated filter. I'm going to double click on effect to reset the sliders. I'm going to bring exposure down a little bit just to start, and I'm going to hold the shift key down when I do this. That way it makes it perfectly square and perpendicular to the photo. So I'm going to pull it down. I'm going to pull it down over the whole thing. Okay. Now I'm going to take the temperature of this graduated filter, and I'm going to cool it a little bit by moving this to the left just slightly. You'll notice these adjustments you have a lot more to, like, there's so much data in there. You just have to move them really a very little bit to get the adjustment you want. I'm going to move tint towards magenta a little bit too. That further cools it off. Okay, now the graduated filter is done. Now I'm going to go do my whites and blacks by holding the Alt key down, and when I push in the white, or push in my mouse for the white slider, you know from the previous episode, screen turns black, and I'm going to move it to the right until I just get some color, white or something creeping through, and it is right there. And I'm going to stop there. Now I'm going to do similarly to the blacks, except I'm going to move to the left until I get some blacks coming through. And right about there. Now it's still now it's a little dark in here, so I'm going to go back to the shadows and I'm going to open that up just a little more. And I'm going to add some clarity, and I'm going to add some vibrance, and then I'm going to add a little bit of contrast. Okay, we're shaping up now. I could hit the backslash key, and that's where we started, and that's where we are now. Okay, now to kind of jazz it up a little bit, I'm going to add some brush strokes. And I'm going to open up the brush, double click on effect, or you could hold the Alt key down, and the where it says effect turns into reset. I'm going to reset that. I want to mess around with some of these trees, so I'm going to bring oops, didn't want to do that. I do that all the time. I'm going to bring exposure up a little bit, and I'm going to make a smaller brush by hitting my left bracket key. And I'm going to just paint on this tree here, and I'm going to paint on this tree here, and I'm going to paint on this tree here, and I'm going to paint on this tree here. Alright, now I'm going to take saturation. Now we're still on this brush. I could do adjustments after I paint the brush or before I paint the brush. I'm going to turn saturation all the way up. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast, just a touch, see what that does. Okay, now this is before the brushes, or that brush, and after the brush. See, I just kind of brightened up and colorized these trees a little bit. Okay, now we're going to do a new brush. We're going to reset it by double clicking effect, and this one I'm going to bring just a touch darker, and I'm going to make my brush a little smaller, and I'm going to darken some of the stuff that's near where I just brightened. Oops. Just to add like it's man-made contrast, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I'm going to turn saturation up on those also. Okay, now this is before the brushes and after the brush. Okay, so we just added some interest back in here. Okay, now I'm going to add a couple more brushes. I'm going to do new, and I'm going to double click effect to reset it, and I'm going to bring exposure down, and I'm going to bring clarity all the way up, and I'm going to bring contrast up a little bit, well, quite a bit, and then I'm going to paint in here. It looks stupid now, don't worry, we're going to take care of that in a minute. Like right now, why don't we do it right now? I'm going to adjust exposure, just make it a little less, or a little more exposed technically. We're going to do something over here, make a bigger brush by hitting the right bracket key and going up here, and going over here. So basically, I'm just adding some strokes to the sky. Oh, keep doing that. I'm not sure I like that one. Let's see. Yeah, I don't like that one. So I'm going to hit the Alt key. Turns my brush into a eraser. You could tell by that minus sign. We'll take this out of there. Okay. And I guess that's it. We can see what it does in here. Yeah, that's, I guess, okay. And okay, so that's it for the sky. Now I'm going to get a new brush, and I'm going to double click Effect to reset it. This time I'm going to turn clarity all the way down, and I'm not going to really do anything else. I'm going to make a bigger brush, and I'm going to just blur this water a touch. There's just a little bit too much specular highlights in that water, and it's just a little distracting, so I want to tone that down. So by turning clarity all the way down, see that before, see it's just a little too, like too many specular highlights in there. Kind of takes your eyes off. I want people to see these trees in the sky. And to further help them see the trees, the cabin, the sky, is I'm going to do a couple more brush strokes here just for the heck of it. So I'm going to click on New, and I'm going to reset it, and I'm just going to take exposure up just a touch, and I'm going to just do something like this. Like this. Alright, so that helps bring people's eyes up towards this, you know, middle colorful part. And while I was doing this, I noticed something else. The cabin's a little dim, so I'm going to brighten that up too. I'm going to do another new brush. Oh, it's easier to keep doing new brushes. That way, if you make a mistake or you decide you don't like it, you could just take one of the brushes away and it doesn't affect everything. And plus, you could individualize your adjustments for each brush. So we're going to bring this cabin up a little bit in brightness, just a little. Okay, I think I'm finally done with brushes. And let me hit the backslash key. That's the 32-bit image that came over from Lightroom or from Photoshop, and this is what we've done to it so far. And that's it. You know, it's because it's got so much data in it, you're going to find it's very noise free. So I'm not even going to bother with the detail slider, doing any sharpening or anything like that. I'm just going to go right into effects, and I'm going to add a slight vignette, as you guys know I normally do. That further helps draw everyone's attention towards the middle. Now, at just first glance, I think this brush down here is a little bit too bright. So that's why we do these individual brushes. I could now just tone this one down a little bit. So we're at minus or plus 32, maybe around plus 23 would be a little more, I don't know, a little better. So that's it. That's now you get the idea. When you do a 32-bit HDR image, you can't really tell that's an HDR image. It doesn't have that typical HDR over-the-top look. But what it did do, it allowed us to create this huge file that had tons of data in it, and we could really you know, tickle the file to bring out all this extreme detail everywhere in the shot. So I hope you guys would use that a lot. The 32-bit HDR image, if you have a very high contrast image with a lot of bright areas and still a lot of dark areas, and you want to bring each out. So that's it for episode 21. I appreciate everyone watching. And if you guys could do me a favor and subscribe to my YouTube channel, I would be really grateful. And if you could share the videos too, that would I'd really appreciate that. So